Chapter 47 of Carpenter's Geographical Reader, Africa, by Frank G. Carpenter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Betty B. Natal, the Garden of South Africa. Today we leave the high, dry plateau and make our way by railroad down to the Indian Ocean through Natal, the Garden of South Africa. This country was one of the first discovered by the Portuguese. When Vasco da Gama in 1497 came around the Cape of Good Hope, he made a short voyage up the east coast, and on Christmas Day, the Natal Day, or birthday of our Savior, entered the beautiful bay on which Durban, the chief city of Natal, stands. He called the place Port Natal in honor of this discovery, and this has been adopted as the name of the colony about it. Port Natal is the best harbor on the eastern coast of the continent, and almost 1,000 vessels call there every year. Railroads have been built from Durban to the high plateau, and goods for Johannesburg and the towns north of it are brought there and sent over these roads. We take the train at Johannesburg for Durban. The cars are comfortable, and we could, if we wished, make the journey of 480 miles in one day. The first part of our trip is over the high, dry, brown plateau, upon which cattle, sheep, and goats are everywhere feeding. We cross the Vaal River, and a little later are in the Drakensberg Mountains. We go down to the coast over a succession of terraces beautifully green. We pass by ravines carpeted with maidenhair ferns, riding now through wooded hills and again over rolling meadows where fat cattle are feeding. There are many fine farms with comfortable homes. Some are fenced with green hedges, and there are frequent groves with trees from 100 to 150 feet high. The crops change from time to time as we pass from the plateau down to the sea. On the highlands there are fields of barley, oats, and maize, and fine cattle and sheep. Farther down are orchards of peaches and apples, and lower still tea and coffee plantations. Along the coast the climate has a tropical character, and there are fields of rice, sugar-cane, and tobacco, together with lemon and orange groves, mango groves, and great beds of pineapples. Natal can grow almost any fruit known to man, and it exports oranges and pineapples to the other colonies about. It is so rich that we wish we could tarry to enjoy the green fields and the beautiful fruits. We stop at one of the stations in the lower part of the colony to visit a tea plantation. Tea leaves are not unlike those of a rose bush, and the bushes are much like our boxwood. The plants are grown from the seed and are set out during the wet weather at the beginning of September, the South African spring, or at the end of March in the autumn. They are planted in rows about 5 feet apart and carefully cultivated. When they are 3 or 4 years old, the leaves are first plucked, and after that from time to time during the summer. Our plantation belongs to an Englishman, and we have no trouble in learning how tea is raised. The rough work is done by natives. We see Kaffir men digging up the rich soil and cultivating the plants, and Kaffir women and boys leaning over the dark green bushes, picking the tea into baskets which they carry to the factory on their heads. A girl can pick about 30 pounds of leaves in a day. We follow some of the tea pickers to the factory and see them spread the green leaves out upon the drying floors. Here they are left until they become withered. They are now as soft as silk and can be rolled into the shape of the tea leaves of our stores. This is done by machinery. The leaves are then dried and packed up in lead-lined boxes for shipment to all parts of the world. Natal has now thousands of acres of tea plantations, the product of which amounts to several million pounds of tea every year. Going on with our journey, we visit dairy farms, tobacco fields, sugar estates, and pineapple plantations, finding the white people everywhere prosperous. They own the best lands, and the natives are working for them. This is so common throughout South Africa that it is said the whites form the brains and the blacks the muscle of the country. The natives here, as in most parts of South Africa, are Bantus. They are Kaffirs or Zulus, who formerly lived in villages scattered over the country, owning cattle and sheep. There are still Kaffir farms and also reservations, lands which the Natal government has set aside for the natives as we have set aside lands for our Indians. These Kaffirs live in low, round, beehive-shaped huts made of poles thatched with straw over which is tied a network of ropes. Such a hut is often surrounded by a fence or hedge, inside which the cattle are kept at night. Some Kaffir villages have such stockades enclosing all the houses, and sometimes a field will be fenced in outside the village for the stock. The interiors of these native huts are of the rudest description. The floor is the ground, and there is little or no furniture except a few pots or kettles, the cooking being done over the coals. We stop off a day on our way to the coast at Pietermaritzburg, the capital of Natal. It is situated in the hills about 70 miles above Durban and is noted for its delightful surroundings. The climate is excellent. There is plenty of rain and the grass is green all the year round. The houses are built of bright red brick made of a clay nearby, and many of them have beautiful gardens. We call upon the governor and visit the Legislative Council building, where the laws for the colony are made. We find English people everywhere, and are told that most of the whites come from England and Scotland, the Dutch being few. Again taking the train, 2 hours brings us to Durban on the Indian Ocean, hundreds of miles below Lourenço, Marques, and more than 800 miles from the Cape of Good Hope. As we come out of the station, we see all sorts of vehicles ready to take us to different parts of the city. There are cabs and carriages with East Indian, Malay, or native African drivers. There are streetcars moved by electricity, and jinrikshas with men in the shafts. We each choose a jinriksha at 2 shillings an hour, and are soon trotting through the streets behind some of the queerest steeds of the world. The jinriksha men are Zulus, wearing white cotton tunics trimmed with red calico and white trousers cut off at the knees. Every man has his head dressed his own way. Some have cow horns fastened to the skull and the hair wrapped around them. Others have strings tied to their wool to which fluffy balls are attached, and others have the hair combed so that it stands out like mops on their heads. They are good-humored fellows, and we go like the wind as they take us from one part of the city to another. We first visit the wharves, where there are great ships from England, Germany, and other parts of Europe, loading coal brought from the mines of northern Natal. The coal is carried into the ships in baskets by Zulus, a long line of men marching up and down for hours at a time. We then go back to the city and spend some time riding through its wide streets. Zulus are employed as policemen, and good order is everywhere kept. Our jinriksha men take us to the schools, the parks, and the botanical garden, ending the journey at the public bathhouse near the town hall. Here we go for a swim. The tank is 90 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 3 feet deep at one end, and 8 feet deep at the other. After our bath, we take a streetcar ride through the town and then shop in the stores. Many of the smaller establishments are kept by East Indian merchants, who wear great turbans of various colors. They have a large part of the trade of the natives. They are also peddlers, carrying goods about from place to place. End of chapter 47. Chapter 48 of Carpenter's Geographical Reader, Africa, by Frank G. Carpenter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Betty B. Cape Colony. We go from Durban to Cape Town by sea. Our steamer is one of the great ocean liners which ply between South Africa and England. It brought out passengers and manufactured goods of all sorts, and is now starting homeward with wool, hides, coffee, and fruit. We take on grain and wool at East London, farther south on the coast at the mouth of the Buffalo River, and also stay several hours at Port Elizabeth on Algoa Bay to load sheep and goats, wool, grain, and ostrich feathers. Port Elizabeth is the second city of Cape Colony, and has such a large export trade that it is sometimes called the Liverpool of South Africa. The land along the coast is sandy, and the town looks bleak and bare as we approach it by sea. The houses rise in terraces from the beach to the tableland above, where the best residences are. We land by means of a tug and take a streetcar ride through the city, visiting the feather, wool, and fruit markets on Market Square. The distance from Port Elizabeth to Cape Town is more than 400 miles, and we are about 2 nights and a day making the voyage. Some hours before reaching the Cape of Good Hope, we steam by Cape Agulhas, the southernmost point of the African continent. Agulhas means needles, and the name comes from the saw-edged reefs and needle-like rocks which lie here and are very dangerous to vessels hugging the coast. The worst of them are just off Danger Point, where a lighthouse now stands. It was here that the steamer Birkenhead went down many years ago. The ship was broken on the rock, and between the surf and the sharks, 357 persons perished. In going by, we keep far out from Cape Agulhas, and also well away from the Cape of Good Hope farther on, finding the latter less windy than Bartholomew Diaz did when he discovered it in 1486 and named it the Cape of Storms. We sail more to the northward, rounding the Cape and enter Table Bay, coming to anchor at the wharves of Cape Town. We are now in the chief commercial city of South Africa and in one of the great ports of the world. Huge ocean steamers from Europe, North America, South America, Asia, and Australia are lying at the docks, and the scenes of loading and unloading cargo are busier than in any other African port we have visited. There are great docks all around us, and enormous breakwaters have been built out to protect the shipping. The railroad cars come right to the steamers so that goods can be carried from here to the chief ports of South Africa. The imports and exports of Cape Town amount at times to more than $200 million a year. We land and take carriages for a drive through the city. How beautiful it is, and how strange! It is built about the shores of Table Bay, rising up the steep slope of Table Mountain, which lies behind. That peak to the left is Devil's Peak, more than 3,000 feet high, and the mountain at the right is the Lion's Head, which is about 2,000 feet above where we now stand. Table Mountain itself is 1,000 feet higher than Devil's Peak. It rises behind the town in a sheer precipice, cutting the skyline with a jagged front 2 miles in length. As it stands there, it looks like an enormous table. There are often white clouds above it, which at times spread out and hang down over the top, looking for all the world like a great tablecloth. We find Cape Town well built. It has large stores of brick and stucco, some beautiful residences, and fine public buildings. A belt of gardens encloses the city, and there are botanical gardens in the center filled with tropical plants and fruits. The streets are well paved, and there are excellent roads leading out into the country. Many of the houses in the suburbs are of one story, but nearly all have gardens and yards about them, and they seem quite as comfortable as our homes in America. Most of the people are white, but we meet many natives as we go through the streets, and also Malays in turbans and lithe Hindus in the dress of East India. There are English soldiers from the garrison nearby, queerly dressed sailors from all parts of the world, and strangers from everywhere who are passing through this gate of the African continent. Cape Town has excellent hotels, and we spend several weeks making excursions by rail to the different parts of the province. Cape Colony is one of the most important of the British possessions in Africa. It is of vast extent, being larger than Texas and Massachusetts combined, and it has such an excellent climate that white men can live in it quite as well as in Europe. A century ago the country was wild and almost unknown. It abounded in game and was inhabited chiefly by savages who fought with one another. Today Cape Colony has great farms and stock ranches and also vineyards and orchards. It produces a vast quantity of fruit and makes wine for export to Europe. It has more than 1 million cattle, more than 1 million sheep, about 5 million goats, and 250,000 ostriches. The colony has several thousand miles of railroad. There are good roads almost everywhere, and the telegraph lines are so many that if the wire were stretched out, it would reach around the globe. Cape Colony has good educational facilities. It has excellent schools. There are universities in Cape Town, and more than 100 public libraries in the different towns. We have the daily newspapers at our breakfast tables, and in them read telegraphic dispatches from the United States. During our stay in Cape Town, we call upon the governor, and then visit the Parliament House, a fine granite structure in a beautiful garden. Cape Colony, like Natal, has a governor appointed by the King of Great Britain, and a parliament or congress elected by its people. The parliament makes the laws so that the colony really governs itself. In our travels through the different states of South Africa, we have met many Boers. The most of them are farmers scattered throughout Cape Colony, the Transvaal, and Orange River Colony. They are the descendants of Dutchmen who came from Holland many years ago to live in South Africa. The country, as we know, was first discovered by the Portuguese, but the Dutch, who are great traders, followed fast on their heels and soon had ships going about the Cape of Good Hope to India. Many of these ships stopped at Table Bay and brought back news to Holland that the land was fertile and fitted for stock and grain raising. In 1652, some Dutchmen came out and formed the first settlement near Table Bay. Others followed, and the country was declared a possession of Holland. It remained so until 1795, when the English, being at war with the Dutch, captured it. Upon the declaration of peace, the English restored the country to the Dutch, but in another war which soon followed, they again took possession of it, and this time for good, although they paid the Dutch several $1,000,000 for it. The Dutch farmers did not like the British government, so they moved farther back into the interior. They had huge wagons with long teams of oxen, with which they could make but a few miles a day. As the English came northward, the Boers pushed on, taking up farms here and there, until they had established themselves in many places in the upper part of Cape Colony, and also in the Orange River Colony and in the Transvaal. They had possession of the two latter colonies at the time gold and diamonds were discovered, and they kept them until their war with the British. At that time the Boers fought bravely for more than 2 years, but they were finally conquered, and in 1902 their colonies came into the hands of the British. End of chapter 48. Chapter 49 of Carpenter's Geographical Reader, Africa, by Frank G. Carpenter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Betty B. German Southwest Africa. We have now completed our exploration of the African continent, with the exception of 2 unimportant colonies in the southwestern part, at the ports of which we shall call on our way home. The first is German Southwest Africa, which lies west of Cape Colony and Rhodesia, extending from them to the Atlantic Ocean, and the other is Angola, or Portuguese West Africa, which is immediately north of this German possession, reaching to the Congo independent state. The territories of both colonies are large, and the climate, in most parts, is so unhealthful that neither has been thoroughly explored. We go by steamer from Cape Town to Angra Bay, in the southern part of German Southwest Africa, and thence sail northward to Walfish Bay, where the English own a landing place, and on a few miles farther to Swakopmund, the chief German port of the colony. Our journey along the coast gives us some idea of the country. A great part of it is desert. It has no rivers worth mentioning except those of its boundaries, the Orange on the south, and the Kunene and Zambezi on the north. The other streams flow only during the wet season, and then but for a short time, when the torrential rains fill their beds so that they overflow the banks and cover the land for miles about like a sea. A short time after the storm has passed, the flood disappears and the river beds are dry again. Along the coast the land is almost altogether desert, the chief plants being dry acacia bushes and starved heather, which are to be seen here and there in the hot sand. Back of this coastal strip there is a mountain range, separating the high plateaus of the interior from the sea. The mountains are also bleak and bare, and this is so of the southern portion of the colony. It is only in the northern and western parts of the plateau that there is enough water to support much animal life. In those regions there are wide grassy plains, upon which feed antelopes, zebras, and herds of cattle. There are also thin groves where leopards, jackals, and lions live with an occasional herd of buffaloes or elephants. The northern part has most of the natives. It is called Damaraland, and its people are sometimes called Damaras. They are chiefly Bantus with brown skins and black hair, and are not unlike the Kaffirs in appearance. Many tribes have large herds of cattle and sheep. The southern part of the colony is known as Namaland, and is inhabited chiefly by tribes of Namas, a species of Hottentots. The Namas are as ugly as any people we have yet seen. They are short in stature, gaunt and angular. They have yellowish-brown skins, high cheekbones, and pointed chins. Their noses are flat, their lips thick and protruding, and their ears large and almost without lobes. Their language sounds to us like the cackling of geese. It consists of a succession of clicks. These people are clad in sheepskins. They wear the wool outside in the summer and turned inward in the winter. Some also have aprons to which glass beads are attached and which reach to the knees. They smear their bodies with rancid grease. The Namas are divided into many small, independent tribes, each ruled by its chief. They live in villages of beehive-shaped huts. Sometimes a village has 10 huts, and sometimes more than 100. The huts are so low that a grown man cannot stand upright in them. Each is formed by a framework of branches tied together in the shape of an inverted bowl, with matting stretched over it. There is a little door at one side through which the people crawl in. Sometimes as many as 12 live in one hut, keeping everything dirty in the extreme. The huts are usually built close to one another, in a circle with their doors at the back. The space within the ring of huts is used for the cattle at night. One would not suppose that the Germans could make much of such a country and people, and so far they have not been able to do so. In total area, German Southwest Africa is about 8 times as great as Ohio. Its native population is small, and it has but few whites. There are several thousand Germans and some English and Boers who have settled in the colony to raise cattle, to trade, or to prospect for mines. But there are no towns of any importance, and the country is far different from Cape Colony, which we have just left. A little railroad has been built across the British possession from Walfish Bay into the interior, and the Germans have a railroad to Windhoek, the capital, which lies 235 miles from Swakopmund, where we now are. They have a small military force there and have established several government schools. There are also some mission schools, but altogether the colony is backward. It has no trade to speak of and is of little importance to the commerce of the world. End of chapter 49. Chapter 50 of Carpenter's Geographical Reader, Africa, by Frank G. Carpenter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by BettyB. Angola, or Portuguese West Africa. We have left Swakopmund and German Southwest Africa and are now traveling along the coast of Angola, the Portuguese colony. The land grows more fertile as we sail northward. The coastal plain is green, and the mountains behind it are heavily wooded. Angola stretches along the Atlantic Ocean from the Cunene River to the mouth of the Congo, a distance of about 1,000 miles, and it goes so far inland that its area is equal to more than 10 states as large as New York. Most of the country is composed of the high plateau back of the mountains. This is well watered. It has vast forests bound together with vines, and great plains covered with grass from 5 to 12 feet high. The forests are much like those of the Congo. They have oil palms, baobabs, and other tropical trees with beautiful blossoms. There are many orchids, and among the creepers are some with a sap from which rubber is made. The rubber creeper has a yellow fruit as large around as an orange, with a pulp which tastes somewhat like a lemon. If any part of this creeper is cut, a milky juice will ooze out and harden upon exposure to the air. It is about the most important product of Angola, furnishing one of the rubbers of commerce. The grass of the Angola plains is like that through which we traveled in our excursions along the banks of the Congo. It is from 5 to 15 feet high and has blades as sharp as a knife. Paths have to be cut through it in order to cross the plains, and the grass is so high it shuts out the wind and makes traveling hot work. When the grass is dry, the natives often set fire to it. Then the whole plain is flame-covered, and sparks by thousands shoot up above the wall of fire. At the same time, the grass stems burst with a sound like myriads of pistol shots. Such a fire roasts the rats, mice, snakes, and other animals which live in the grass, and it is always followed by a great flock of birds which swoop down upon the black plain to eat the dead animals. The forests and jungle never burn. They are the refuge of antelopes, elephants, hippopotamuses, buffaloes, and even lions and leopards are to be found in them. Angola is far more thickly peopled than German Southwest Africa. It has numerous tribes of Bantus, much like those we saw on the Congo. Each has its own chief, and the different tribes are often at war with one another. There are but few whites except at the ports and at the trading stations in the interior, and the most of the country is altogether wild and unexplored. We first call at Mossamedes, the chief port of southern Angola. It lies about 200 miles north of the Cunene River, in a region of good grazing lands. The natives have goats, sheep, and cattle, and strange to say, they train their cattle as riding animals. We each hire an ox for a jaunt into the country during the stay of the steamer. Our saddles are well-padded leather cushions with stirrups attached, and our bridles are each a pair of reins fastened to a round iron bar thrust through a hole in the animal's nose. The oxen trot easily, and we find we can guide them in this way as well as though they were trained horses, and we had the ordinary bridle and bit. Going northward, we next stop at Benguela, a thriving settlement situated on a level plain near the sea, with green hills a few miles behind it. The town has several fine squares, some factories, and good houses and stores. Caravans of natives are always coming in or going out, bringing the products of the interior and taking back foreign goods, including gay calicoes, beads, guns, powder, tobacco, and other things in exchange. At the factories we see great quantities of rubber, coffee, palm nuts, and palm oil, as well as ivory tusks and balls of beeswax, which have just come in. Some of the tusks are so large that the natives make a framework of wood in order that they may rest more easily on their shoulders while carrying them. The beeswax is taken from both wild and tame bees. Some of these people are excellent beekeepers. They make hives of sections of a limb of the baobab tree, scooping out the inside and fastening up the ends with boards and clay, but leaving little holes for the bees to come in and out. Such hives are fastened in the branches of low trees and thatched with grass to keep off the rain. The honey and wax are taken out every year, a little being left so that the bees will not go away. While we wait at Benguela, we have a chance to visit the native villages nearby. They are made of rude huts of wicker and mud with roofs of grass thatch. The doors are so low we have to stoop to go in. The floors are the ground, and about the only furniture is a low bed of sticks or palm leaves with a sleeping mat on it. Sometimes there is a pillow of matting stuffed with wild cotton, or perhaps a wooden pillow 3 or 4 inches high. Many of the people sleep without pillows, resting their heads upon one arm. Some sleep on the floor. There are little gardens about the huts, and in them we see women hoeing. The women here, as in most parts of Africa, do the hard work. They dig the ground with little hoes, which have iron blades like a large oyster shell, and wooden handles about 8 inches long. They plant Indian corn, mandioca, red peppers, and other things, and harvest them when ripe. The native men are often mechanics, working in iron and wood. They make canoes, build huts, and go hunting and fishing. They are also porters, carrying goods over the country. The natives of Angola dress much the same as in parts of the Congo Valley. Near the coast the men have waistcloths which reach to their knees, being tied about the body with a strip of red cloth. The women wear but little more, and the children go naked. Both sexes have odd ways of dressing the hair, and many of the women wear heavy rings of iron, brass, or tin about their ankles or wrists. A woman will sometimes carry 14 pounds of iron upon her naked feet. The bands are fixed on by a blacksmith. They are often so thick that the wearer has to tie rags about them to protect her skin from injury until it is hardened. We are frequently asked to smoke or snuff during our stay with the natives. Almost everyone uses snuff. He pours about a teaspoonful of the powdered tobacco into the palm of his hand, and thrusting his nose down into the mixture, draws in all he can. We each try a small pinch and nearly sneeze our heads off, for they have added red pepper to the snuff to make it stronger. At first we think this a trick, but learn that they like snuff better this way. Returning to the steamer, we go along the coast northward to Loanda, the capital of the colony and one of the oldest towns of Western Africa. It was founded in 1575 and was for a long time one of the chief seats of the slave trade with Brazil and Cuba, as many as 100,000 slaves having been exported in a year. When the slave trade stopped, Loanda lost its importance, but it has recently grown by its exports of native products and is now said to be the finest city of Western Africa. Coffee and sugar plantations have been set out in the country behind, and coffee has become a staple export. A railroad has been built several hundred miles into the interior, and upon it and the Kwanza River, which is not far south of the port, great quantities of rubber, wax, palm oil, hides, cotton, ivory, and peanuts are brought here for shipment to Europe. The Kwanza is the chief river of Angola, and it forms one of the highways to the interior, although it has many rapids and is navigable for short distances only. We travel inland and stop a while at Novo Redondo, at the head of navigation of the Kwanza, some distance back from the coast. The town is a thriving trading center. It has macadamized streets lined with acacia trees. On nearly all the corners are the shops of the traders, and we see caravans of porters coming in with loads of native goods on their shoulders. On our way back to Loanda, we make several excursions through the country, riding in hammocks slung to poles which rest on the shoulders of men. Our porters go on the trot, and although they jolt us at first, we soon become so used to the motion that we frequently drop off to sleep. 4 lines of ocean steamers call regularly at Loanda. Upon our return, we find one belonging to the British Navigation Company at anchor in the harbor. It is to sail within a few hours, and as we have now completed our tour of the African continent, we shall take passage upon it for Liverpool. While waiting, we call a maquila and take a ride through Loanda. The town has only a few thousand Europeans, but many more natives. We visit the stores in the lower part along the bay, spend a short time in the markets, buying a few curios to take home to our friends, and then call upon the governor and other officials in the residence part of the city, which lies on the hill farther back. The steamboat whistles as we leave the governor's house, and we go down to the wharf and hurry on board. Our baggage has already been packed away in the hold, and a little later we are steaming outward on our long voyage home. We call at the Cape Verde Islands, the Canaries, and Madeiras, and then sail on northward to Liverpool, from where a fast ocean liner in 6 days takes us across the Atlantic home to New York. End of chapter 50. End of Carpenter's Geographical Reader, Africa, by Frank G. Carpenter.